Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
All right, greetings everyone, and welcome to another great episode of IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Daniel Lowry, and in today's episode, well, it's all about more in our A+ series. We're trying to move along that train. It is definitely a long and illustrious journey, that is for sure. And of course, joining us, leading us even in that journey, our good friend, Mr. Wes Bryan. Wes, we're glad to have you again. How's it going?
Man, it's going great. It is like one of those trains you confront out there, you know, in the Midwest where, you know, if you're at the railroad tracks, passes in the morning, by the time you're ready to clock out in the afternoon, it is done. That's right. So, well, what part of the train are we looking at this point? We are continuing along in troubleshooting. We've looked in some of the past troubleshooting episodes. We looked at some of the different components like motherboard, RAM, if you will, power issues, talked about CPU. We've shown you some of the parts that you can see as well inside of things like laptops. And really when it comes down to it, we're going to be talking about mobile devices. And as you can see already by the title of this show, we'll be looking at some of the common issues that you can face when it comes to mobile devices. However, one of the things we want to kind of preface this whole entire episode with is the fact that, well, guess what? A computer is a computer is a computer, and mobile devices are really no different. They have all the same components that you have inside of your workstations and your laptops. And again, we're just talking about maybe more of a minuscule, you know, smaller, very compact type form factor. And just like we've mentioned in laptops, right, we said two of the major considerations when it comes to laptop technology is battery life and thermal management, right? And when we say thermal management, we don't want things to overheat. And we have a very, very restrictive amount of space in which we can place things like cooling systems, right? Well, that gets even smaller when you talk about more mobility, right? Where, you know, where a laptop, yeah, is a mobile device, but it's really classified today more as a portable device because on a smaller scale, mobile devices are things like your tablets, cell phones. They even quote, and we talk about this in other episodes, like the phablet, which I think is great. That's a phone tablet, right? It's essentially like a note, right? A Galaxy Note, if you guys have seen those out there, right? They have basically a phone that's almost the size of a notebook, or if you will, a tablet there. So again, that is some of the things that you have to keep in mind. Again, you have to worry about battery life and overheating. Now, the other thing, when it comes to troubleshooting these issues and repairing them, there are two basics that we also have to keep in mind, right? We have to keep in mind things like, you know, devices or components within these devices, I should say, that are field serviceable versus things that aren't field serviceable, all right? Non-field field serviceable items, you know, things that, well, we're going to have to get an upgrade or we're going to have to just completely replace the device. And I want to kind of just start out there before we move into some of the different categories that they call out, and ladies and gentlemen out there, they call out a bunch here. So we are going to kind of just rifle through these and talk about each category here individually. But starting out, I want to talk about repairs versus upgrade/replacement. Now, the reason I'm putting upgrades and replacement, if you will, in the same category is because let's say that you have a component that you can't replace. Well, that means you can't upgrade it either, right? Because it's built in, it's soldered into the PCB, right? We have a lot of SoC devices, system on a chip. You know, it's interesting, Dan, I actually heard a term that I've always associated with voice over IP. I was looking up and researching, and I found SIP. And I'm like, well, SIP, I know that's a session initiation protocol and has to do with voice over IP. It is system in a package, right? So another classification of system on a chip. Basically, everything is located on a single board, right?
That's a new one on me as well, my man.
Yeah, I had no clue. I was like, well, now we have another acronym. So thank goodness that acronym isn't going to be in the acronym list at the end of the objectives, but it might be a term that you start to hear more and more, right? Because, you know, it's easier to sell something if it sounds like a new product, and a lot of times all it is a repainting of an old product, and it's just marketed as something brand new. All right, so remember, something that is upgradable or isn't upgradable, I guess I should say, is going to require you to replace the device, all right? So let's give you an example of some things that are field serviceable, right? Something that you can replace if it gets damaged, right? When we think about things like your screens. Now, when we talk about screens, remember, we talk about cracked screens.
We've all seen these, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The teenage girl that's running around with something that looks like she hit it with a baseball bat.
Yes, that's an elaborate screensaver,
yes,
right?
Yes. The spider web.
Yeah, there's exactly that. You know, you see somebody that got a bunch of Band-Aids on their fingers, looks like they're, you know, Michael Jackson from the 80s, you know, holding the microphones with blisters on his hands. But Well, a lot of times these things can be replaced. Now, I don't mean necessarily that you might be able to replace them. I wouldn't try to replace a screen to save my life because I know I've cracked many of these mobile devices open, and a lot of times what you have to do is you have to get a kit because when you open the device, you break the clips that are basically holding that screen on, in place. The other thing you also have to keep in mind too is that a lot of times they have capacitive or resistive touch screens, and those could be damaged if you're replacing them. So you've got other sensors that have to be replaced with the screen. But the point is, they can be replaced, right? If you damage a screen, you could take it to some company. Maybe you're thinking about getting into that type of company. Maybe you're going to be a tech at one of those companies, right? Storage expansion. Now, with the exception, and I don't have it on me right now, which I could show you, I've got a Google Pixel. Not every device, not every mobile device allows you the ability to put like a micro SD card in and expand the storage capabilities. However, a lot of them do, right? A lot of these mobile devices, tablets and stuff like that, do allow you to do just that.
Yeah, mine does. I have the new Galaxy S8. It has a micro SD card.
Perfect, and it's one of those things that, if you have cloud-based technologies, maybe that's not a concern. And again, this is not really a buying or selling point, but Dan's phone needs to upgrade the storage capacity, right? It's upgradable in the fact that he doesn't have to replace it, and it's something that can be field serviceable, right? He can go to Best Buy or Newegg or Tire Direct and get one of those 128 gig micro SD cards, slap it right in there. Now we've got 128 gigs that maybe we started out with 32, right, or 64. I know they're different capacities. So something like that. Damaged screen, no display, can't see that we can't use or interact with the device. We can replace that. Storage expansion, right? This is something that's field serviceable. Non-integrated batteries. That's another thing. Right? If you have a battery that's got basically a cover and you can replace the battery, that's a field serviceable thing. So if you get a swollen battery, right? A swollen battery typically means that battery's not only is it about to explode, but you need to replace it, right? And usually replace it fast. But it's something that we can do in the field, right? If you're a tech, you can do this for somebody, or if you're just a tech savvy end user, you can go over to your electronics company and just match it with the model and replace the battery, right? It's field serviceable. Here's another thing, SIM cards. Certain mobile devices allow you to switch carriers. Ones that use the SIM cards are on the GSM, the Global Systems for Mobile Communication, telecommunication, right? I know technically it's called Global Systems for Mobiles, but mobile telecommunications, right? If I'm on a GSM-based network from my provider, guess what? I can buy a new phone. I can upgrade, and it's essentially another thing that could be considered field serviceable because I can pop out the SIM card that has all of my information, and I could put it into a new phone or a new device, and guess what? Now I'm not carrier locked. Now that is the polar opposites to something that maybe is on one of the CDMA phones, right? The Code Divisional Multiple Access phones, right? CDMA carriers, they don't have SIM cards. You get carrier locked, you get vendor locked. So if I need to replace the phone, it's not going to be field serviceable. It's going to be something where I have to literally buy a new phone. I got to upgrade, all right? Now, other non-field serviceable parts, built-in NAND flash memory, right? This isn't like things like laptops that had SODIMM modules in them where I can replace them, right? If it's integrated into the phone and first of all something fails in it, I have to replace the entire phone. And here's where the upgrade part comes in. Maybe I need more memory in my phone. Well, sorry, you're not going to be able to upgrade. You're going to have to replace the device. CPUs, right? And we talk in another episode about the mobile CPUs, but it doesn't matter if you're talking about the A series from Apple, all the A4, A5s, all the way up to 8, 9X now that they have today. Snapdragon Pros, right, are out there. Intel has their I series and their Intel M series. AMD has their A series as well. All of these are great. But a lot of times they can't be replaced because they're an SoC-based device. System on a chip means the whole entire thing's integrated into the motherboard, and it is a surface mount device that is directly soldered to the PCB. Again, it's non-field serviceable. So I wanted to kind of preface this, this whole entire episode before we get into some of the components that you could see and some of the situations they put us in that you don't always have a one-size-fits-all solution. Some devices, yes, you might be able to upgrade. Some devices, you might be able to change things interactively like the screen. Some things, unfortunately, you're out of luck on that one. You're going to have to replace the device. That's just the way it goes. All right. So what are some of the things, some of the symptoms that we have to worry about, right? Well, we briefly just mentioned no display, right? A cracked display, like Dan was saying, you know, the teenager that just happened to have the phone out there at the food court, drops it, you know, or the person that puts it in the back of their pocket goes to grab it, drops it, right? Whatever cracks the display, if you have no display, chances are, well, you've obviously damaged it. Now, I say that, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a damaged display. It could be a power issue, right? If your phone isn't, or your device isn't getting charged, you have no power, obviously you have no display. So we have to go through some troubleshooting techniques and always question the obvious, right? We find out what are the symptoms. Then once we know what the symptoms are, we can try to identify what the root cause is, right? We got to be careful, right? We don't want to treat the symptom and not the cause, right? If you, oh, well, I have no screen, right? No display. Well, I replaced the screen, cost me $200, but it was actually the battery that had failed and I had no power to the device. Well, you treated the symptom, but you didn't actually get to the root cause. So do keep that in mind. Could be battery issues. The other thing that could be that can happen with these devices, like we've shown you in the laptop issue, remember every device is going to have some form of backlighting device. If it's an OLED or you know I almost said orthogonal, organic light emitting diode. If it's an LCD screen, if it's an LED screen, well, if it's an LED screen, it's going to be something called a TFT, thin film transistor. And yes, those transistors can fail. The backlighting sources can fail as well. If it's a backlighting source, it can also give you a dim display. All right, one of the things that I'll tell some people that have asked me before says, I got a really dim screen and I can't figure out what's going on. All right, well, here's something that you can do. Go into a room, even if you have to go into a closet that has zero light in it. Turn the device on. If you can just faintly see a screen, it's your backlight source that's failed. Right? That's a typical indication that the backlight inverter has failed and you have to replace it. Sometimes you can replace it. Again, sometimes you might not be able to replace it. All right, so with dim display, it could be configuration. Dan, I don't know, does your phone do this to you when you start to lose power where it just automatically dims the screen because it's trying to conserve battery life?
Well, the S8 has a weird feature where it's always kind of doing that unless you're actively using the phone.
Oh, okay, so they're really green, super green, right? Yeah, and mine honestly, you know, now that you mentioned it, mine kind of does that too, right? So a dim screen could be a power saving feature, right? And like Dan said, it might be happening all the time. And mine definitely does it once it gets to the low power. It asks you, and I think this is more of a feature of Android, it asks you, do you want to turn on power saving? When you do, you lose the ability to do like background application updates, and as well, you dim the screen out. It could be a configuration where quite literally, you've taken the slider on the operating system and slid the brightness all the way down and you can barely see it. Direct sunlight. Again, sometimes when you get these phones out there in the direct sunlight, what ends up happening is you can't even see them at all, and there's nothing wrong with the screen. All right, so do keep that in mind, you know, that it could be configuration. It could be direct sunlight. Power saving settings are initiated, and it could be constantly going on. What are some of the other things that we have? A flickering display. Now, a lot of times, I will tell you, a flickering display has to do with a loose connection. Not always, but a lot of times it has to do with a loose connection. It could be a damaged display. I've seen where you've dropped these phones, you've dropped these tablets, and they get a little crack in the glass, and you'll see a little bit of a flicker, right? It could be damaged. A lot of times it's a loose connection. Again, whether it's field serviceable or not, you have to check with the manufacturer. And the other thing too is keep in mind, if you're paying for a warranty, don't put your superhero outfit on and try to open it up. Send it back to them. There's a time to be a tech, and there's a time to be smart. All right, well, you should be smart being a tech too, or you get yourself in trouble. But always be smart, right? Use your warranty. Let them be the technicians. That's what you paid for the warranty. It's why you have a warranty. Don't forget to use it. All right, Dan, what are some of the other things in this laundry list? We have sticking keys. All right, when it comes to sticking keys, a lot of times our devices today have a non-tactile touchscreen, right? If you happen to have, whether it's a laptop, and I know this really isn't a laptop section, but if it happens to be a laptop, it could be debris.
Well, laptops are considered mobile devices.
They really are. And you know, it's kind of interesting because we say mobile devices, you're absolutely correct, but they don't call laptops out here, right? So absolutely. And sticking keys, it's really going to be only a laptop today, right? Because I just say that, yeah, and I know BlackBerry's out there. I know they still have, we call the turn and burn phones, the flip phones, you know, track phones are out there. So yes, you could, and a lot of times it's just debris. You know, dirt, grime, or dust.
So put it in the dishwasher.
That's right.
Fix it
Put
right
it in the
up.
dishwasher.
Yeah.
So one of the things to keep in mind too is that sometimes your touch screens you look at the keyboard, and you've pushed a button on the keyboard and it sticks, reboot the phone. Right? It could be a memory hang, could be an application hang, could be, you know, the operating system is hanging there. I've actually seen that too. It's kind of interesting, the lack of a key and it's still sticking. Let's see, what else do we got? Damage to the plastic hinges, if it happens to be one that you can, again, tactily depress. Keep in mind, you have to be very careful. Some people will tell you, I'll just pop the key off, use a little cotton swab and a little bit of rubbing alcohol, very lightly moistened, right? And kind of rub the grime out. You got to be careful because you'll see that they actually swivel in pieces like this, and the little braces can be a nightmare to get back on. In fact, one of the laptops that my wife had when my oldest son was just a baby, the first thing he'd do, he'd walk over and he'd grab a key and he'd pop it right off. He just loved doing that. So over the years of using that laptop, we ended up having quite a few keys that were missing until finally we ended up having to get rid of the laptop, and that's because the plastic hinges. The little hinges that the cover pops into broke, and then at that point there's really nothing that you can do to actually put them back on. All right, so sticking keys can happen. Battery not charging. All right, many of you guys have probably seen this. And before I even get into some of the things that I've written down, I'm going to give props over to our chat room, right? Because our chat room's got a great one right here. It says, you know, pocket in, you know, you got lint in pocket. Look at pocket lint. How about we try that? Reverse that. You have pocket lint, right? A dirt, and it's right in the charging port where you plug the charging cable in, right? And it blocks the electrical connection.
It's like the belly button of the device.
That's right. That's absolutely.
So it's got lint in it.
So yeah, and got to give props to the chat room again for that one there, because that's right. Any debris that's in the charging port itself, you don't make good contact, you're not going to get a charge. Now this could be the battery failing too. Remember, any kind of battery, it doesn't have to be a fast charging battery, it doesn't have to be a slow charging battery, you know, normal. Qualcomm has their rapid charge and stuff. If the battery isn't charging, the battery, it's kind of like, you know, if you understand what's going on when you're putting a charge, you're flexing the muscles of the battery. Eventually, it's going to die. It won't be able to hold that charge anymore. So it could be a failing battery, all right? The charger could be failing too. I've had many of those wall warts, we call them. We joke around, call them wall warts. I've seen many of the wall chargers that have just failed, right? I've had quite a few tablets over the years, and they all pick on me around here because I think I've had 4 or 5 iPads. I've had quite a few Android tablets, and the chargers fail. The other thing, too, is the cables that connect to the charger. The cables fail too, right? If you have a micro USB connector, or if you have some proprietary connector like a lightning connector, or the iPads used to have that 15-pin connector for a while, you know, they're all pretty much the lightning connector. You might have a proprietary charging cable, right, or a proprietary port, right? And those cables fail too, right? The cables themselves. Now, the other thing you also have to keep in mind is that the chargers, Android's really good about this. I really like this. Android's good about this in the fact that you can almost swap any basic Android charger that's a micro USB, and it's going to support most of your Android devices. Apple only until recently has started to license out to manufacturers the ability to make charging cables for the Apple-based devices. And it's a quality control thing. You know, I'm not here to, pass any judgment here. I'm sure on their thought process and some of the articles and forums that I've read is they want to make sure that it's good, clean, quality electricity that is going into their devices because of some of the insurance or the warranties that they place on them, right? They want to make sure that it isn't a manufacturer defect, okay? So keep in mind that just because you potentially have a cable that plugs in to a micro USB port doesn't mean that it's a charging cable. I've seen these really thin cables that are actually, they're just data cables. They put no electrical power behind them. So if the battery's failing to charge, make sure that you don't just have a basic charging cable, right? A basic data cable that doesn't have the charging capabilities too. What else? AC power source, right? If you're plugging your charger into an AC outlet and that AC outlet's failed, again, simple fixes, right? Question the obvious, even on this exam. Could be the DC jack itself, all right? The DC jack, so we'll go back to our chat room where they said they talk about pocket lint and dirt in the charging port, you know? One of the easiest fixes for non-charging, to quote it exactly, right? Well, if the DC jack has failed, that can happen. That can also cause a lack of charge as well. All right, if you're using some kind of power bank, I love power banks. I got an extended power bank, and when we took a trip across seas out to Auckland in Australia, a couple years ago, it was one of the best things I had. Well, is the power bank, did it lose its charge? Because if it loses its charge, then your battery is gonna fail to charge. All right, so I'm going to go ahead, Dan. I know I'm skipping around just one here because they call out another one called no power, and I want to go, since we're talking about power, let's go ahead and talk about that one. If it's no power, it could be a battery issue, could be charging issue, could be the device is turned off, right? The other thing too to keep in mind is if you're changing batteries out, maybe you've had to replace the battery. Make sure that you've got good, clean electrical contacts. Right? If the electrical contacts that the battery makes basically a connection to the phone or the device has failed or it's got grime on it, that can cause problems. Now, sometimes in the tablets and stuff like that, you don't open up. The battery's all internal and there's nothing you can do to replace them. So it's also recommended to check out whatever the manufacturer says you should do. All right, and it could be a damaged device. When it comes down to it, you might have no power just because, well, the device is completely damaged, and unfortunately you have to kind of check out what do you have a field serviceable part versus a non-field serviceable part. All right, now they call out some interesting things that really have to do with, like, for instance, the pointers that you see on these devices. This happens a lot in laptops, or can happen in laptops, and that's ghost cursor and pointer drift. Dan, I used to have one of the older ThinkPads before they went to Lenovo. And it was back when they was still IBM, and I remember you had the little pencil eraser, right, the track point, right in the middle of the keyboard. And I remember as the computer would turn on and the mouse pointer would be rendered in the operating system, I think it was Windows XP, that pointer would just start to drift to the side, and I learned later that you could calibrate them. At the time, I didn't know. I'm like, oh man, that is annoying. But it could also be debris. If you do have something like that, like a track point system, it could be debris, and you might need to clean it out. If it's a ghost cursor, the ghost cursor, again, this could be essentially some kind of driver issue. If you have, for instance, a digitizer, this could be some kind of battery failure. If you're using a wireless dongle for a digitizer, could be a failure on that issue. You might need to reinstall the driver itself. If you feel that the driver could be causing the issue, could be compatibility issues too. Stylus interaction, you might have to just recalibrate the device itself, right? Or you could, if it's a touch screen, it's causing problems, you might need to clean the screen with a lint-free cloth. Now, I know most of us around here pretty much have some kind of case around our phones, right? I go to the extreme because I am known to break things. Everybody else knows that around here, so I've got a pretty heavy hand when it comes to, pretty much everything, some things around here. So I go with an OtterBox case, and the OtterBox case that I have actually has the whole plastic sleeving is encases the phone. Well, here's the thing. When I put that phone in my pocket, and I leave it there, and here in the Florida, where we're not lax for sun or hot temperatures out there, I start to sweat, and I get a little bit of water in between the screen and the touch screen, and the pointer drifts all over the place, right? Well, it's not really a pointer, but it doesn't interact well. I start getting things that are turning on and closing down, right? So you might need to take the case off, and you might have to clean the screen as well. If you're one of these ones that, like Dan and some of the other people who have actually the protective cover that's placed over and adheses, it's like it has an adhesive to the screen. If you get any debris or bubbles in between there, that can cause problems, and it can cause problems with the interaction of the device itself. All right. So the other thing that they talk about too is, your numerical lock, num lock they call it, your numeric lock, num lock indicator lights. If you happen to see that those are turned on, a lot of times that's a keyboard shortcut with a function key on a laptop that you've maybe pressed, and now you're getting some kind of alternate output. Just check the function key. Right? If it's something that you always have to press a keyboard shortcut to happen, maybe you're pressing two keys at one time, and again, you're getting that alternate output. If it's a light that is continuously on, again, you might just have to press a keyboard shortcut to turn it off to make sure that that doesn't happen. All right. Now, the next series of things that we have are, for instance, some wireless or some networking issues. All right, and there are tons of networking issues. So keep in mind, we've talked about network troubleshooting here, so I'm going to kind of brief over some of these and go back and look at our networking section if you need a little bit more information on them. Comes to mobile devices, they talk about intermittent wireless, right? We talk about intermittent wireless. The first thing you need to check is proximity to your access point. because guess what? If you're too far from your access point, you might start losing signal, right? You might get that intermittent signal as you basically go out of the reach of the access point itself. It could be wireless antenna damage, right? If you've dropped any device, you could have a wireless antenna in there that has actually been damaged, or the card itself has been damaged. A lot of times in mobile devices that we have here outside of a laptop environment, and even with the laptops, you can't replace the wireless card. You'll see in our laptop section that Dan and I did that we did have a removable wireless card with an antenna that went around the display, so that could be changed out and could be repaired. Or you know, just completely replaced. However, within some of your mobile devices, you don't have that ability. It could be obstacles. Obstacles are in the way between you and whatever the access point is, the signal. Could be radio frequency interference, right? Microwaves, other cordless phones, cell phones, if you will, high intensity discharge lamps, if your access point happens to be near one of those. So you might need to, you know, think about your AP, your access point placement, reposition the access point, or the antenna placement. I don't know, Dan, if you've had to do this before, but I've got dipole antennas on the back of an ASUS router that I have, and the antennas get, you know, the connection points get loose, and I come in and all the antennas are pointing down to the ground.
Yeah, it definitely will happen from time to time. You're just not getting quite the coverage you expect at that point.
It's like, well, I can't tell why I'm not getting coverage. Well, that's because it's pointing behind the dresser, right? So, again, that's something that can happen too. So some of the solutions to that, move closer to the access point. You say, well, Wes, I'm as close to the access point as I can get. Well, here's another thing that you can get. It's relatively easy today to install a wireless range extender, right? They got them where you can just plug them right into a wall outlet. You push a button on them and it looks for another wireless access point and it seamlessly connects, and it makes it a lot easier, can extend the coverage area, can start to alleviate some of the intermittent wireless access. You say, well, wait a second, I wouldn't know where in my building or where in my home to put that. Well, that's great. Pull out your mobile phone and find applications like Wi-Fi Analyzer that allow you to look at what the signal strength is and take that on your device and walk through your house. And if the decibels start to decrease, well, guess what? That's the gain, that's the signal strength. That's the area you're going to have to place the wireless range extender. So a lot of great things that they make it easy for us to, you know, kind of overcome some of these issues today where, you know, in past experience, it would be very expensive and sometimes very technical to do. Today they've got almost, and I don't want to say plug and play because we got a technology that is specifically plug and play, but it's very close, right? Plug and enjoy, if you will. We'll make up our own terms here. So remove obstacles if you can. It's not necessarily that you can just sit there and take out a load-bearing wall because you're not getting wireless access. But it might be something. Again, if it's radio frequency interference, if that might be something that's suspected, just move the access point if you can. All right, no wireless connectivity. All our basic wireless troubleshooting things that go on, right? It could be the wireless adapter itself is disabled. It could be an airplane mode. You could have security settings that are a mismatch, right? Encryption mismatch. Could be the fact that maybe your company or your house, you've got enabled things like MAC filtering, and you're not allowed. It's like a blacklist, which means, you know, if you're on this list, you can't connect, or you're doing whitelisting, which gets difficult as well because you're saying anything on this list with this media access control address can connect to the network, and if you're not on this list, sorry, no reservations at the restaurant for you. You might have to disable that. That might be something that somebody got in there and they're like, ooh, let's go ahead and make it secure. Remember, as you guys will go on in your training here at CompTIA, you know, whether it's A+, Net+, Security Plus, and beyond, we always talk about security, right? Yeah, I want the securest network possible. Well, it's going to be probably the most inconvenient network as well, too. So there's always a fine balance there. Hidden SSID, remember the service set identifier. If for security purposes you disable the broadcasting of your service set identifier, a lot of times what you're doing is only keeping the legitimate people out of your network. A lot of times you're doing very little to stop a hacker. All right, and that means you'll have to know what the SSID is, know that the access point is turned on, and manually configure it inside of the wireless adapter in whatever device it is that connects. Doesn't matter if it's a laptop, doesn't matter if it's a workstation that has a wireless adapter installed in it. Standard mismatches, right? 802.11, the wireless communications. Keep in mind that when we talk about wireless communications, if you got an 802.11n network, right, you can support all the protocols, right? But if you've got an AC network, you can support N, and that's it, right? Unless it's got a dual band radio, but that's for another day. So that's some of the things that can do it. I already mentioned airplane mode. Remember to enable the wireless adapter, reconfigure security settings. Standard, you know, Make sure that you have standard compatibility, reposition the access point if you need to, and last but not least, go ahead and turn off airplane mode. Now, Dan, that is a lot of information when it comes to mobile devices, but I'm looking at my list, bud, and I have just scratched the surface, so I don't know if we have enough time in this episode.
Well, that's not a problem, my man. We'll just roll into a part 2 for you and our good folks out there that are watching. So definitely join us back for that, but it does look like we are at the end of this one, so we're going to sign off. For IT Pro TV, I've been your host, Daniel Lowry.
And I'm Wes Bryan.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.